Hello and welcome to the jungle, brought to you by the Riverfront and Blue Wire. My name is Owen Timmerding, and joining us today for the first time is Caroline Palmer. Caroline, welcome to the program.
Hello, happy to be here.
It's great. So, Caroline, you're new to the Riverfront Media, new to Welcome to the Jungle. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into some big time Bengals news.
All right, awesome. My name is Caroline. I am originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, so a little bit out of the way. I am a junior at Miami. I also play on the women's soccer team here. I'm just a lover of all things sports. I have known I've wanted to be involved in this industry since like six or seven, so it's always something I'm really passionate about. I've done my fair share of fantasy football leagues and all that kind of stuff. So when I got the opportunity to just talk about the NFL, there was really no reason for me to turn it down. So
That's awesome. Well, we're super happy to have you on and just kind of talk about some great stuff happening. Well, really not so great stuff happening in Who Dey Nation right now. So really, emergency podcast happening today. This is our third show of the week. We've had to do two emergency podcasts now this week, this being the second, and that being Cincinnati Bengals All-Pro star defensive end Trey Hendrickson has been permitted by the organization to seek a trade. As a lot of Bengals fans out there know, he has been looking for this new contract. He wants to be paid big money coming off of his NFL sack leading season and a second place finish in Defensive Player of the Year. Caroline, you can kind of go all over the place here. I've done some reading. Obviously, the Bengals fan in me wants you want to keep your best players around. And from seeing Trey Hendrickson's performance and his production the last few years with Cincinnati, it's hard to not pay him. But on the other end of the other side of the coin here, you see how guys at the defensive end position kind of change up and how they play and how their body kind of naturally shows, so to speak, once they turn 30, and that's where he is. So I kind of just want to hear your thoughts. I know you're not a big Bengals fan, and so you're not a Bengals fan to the core like a lot of us here are. So it's interesting to see another perspective, just a normal NFL fan.
yeah, I'm not gonna lie here. I was a little bit surprised.
Yeah,
I thought that Hendrickson obviously had a fantastic season. I'd argue that he was probably up there with Burrow for most impactful on their season, given
totally.
the fact that their defense was very poorly ranked throughout the entirety of last year. Um, Honestly, when it dropped pretty much, I wanna say, like, 12 hours after the Max Crosby deal, I
Hmm.
became a little bit less surprised, I guess, because we've seen recently that they franchise tagged T. Higgins again to kind of keep him there. Obviously, Jamar Chase has made big money. They're that pending with T. Higgins, he's pending big money or else he's gonna leave as well. So, it kind of proves to me a little bit that they're kind of shifting on keeping their offensive weapons rather than their defensive weapons, which with the retirement of Sam Hubbard, I was again also a little bit surprised that they were so eager to let him go, but
Yeah.
it's something that I can understand both sides of that story, but I can understand why it would be frustrating because if that was my team, I would be a little bit upset as well.
Exactly. In the moment, I was really frustrated because obviously you can't. There's not been an NFL sack leader leaving his team since Jared Allen did in I think around '07. He went from Kansas City, led the league in sacks, and then went to Minnesota for a few years where he had a couple great years. The difference between the two is Jared Allen was 25, 26 at the time. There's a great article by Jay Morrison and he works for Sports Illustrated now, I believe. He is a Bengals beat writer, and he put out a great piece this morning, kind of explaining both sides and how it's really a good thing for that this is happening, and it could end up working out for both sides on the party here. It's just so confusing because the casual NFL fan, the non-Bengals fan sees this and you're like, how do you let this happen? And the frustrating part is the Bengals ownership, and we've talked ad nauseum about this on this program, and people all across the NFL landscape know is that they are not run the best way. They have this family-owned business. They don't make any money out. Well, their core, the Brown family business, is the Cincinnati Bengals, which is different than lots of other teams, which
Mhm.
allows them, which kind of ties their hands here. So it's so hard, and I just keep saying this because you wanna keep your best players, but like you said, Max Crosby is the best example of this. I really think, and I some stuff I read, is that the Bengals and Hendrickson were close and the numbers were
Yeah.
there. The thing is, this Crosby deal threw that all out the window.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think not just for him. I mean, I am a Panthers fan, also an Eagles fan because my parents are from up north. The Eagles are kind of running into the same problem with like Josh
Mhm.
Sweat as well, because this Max Crosby deal basically blew everything out of the water. What we originally thought with like the Nick Bosa's and the Aaron Donalds, they
Totally.
basically the Raiders have just said we're locking him down. And then Hendrickson sees the dollar amount and he's like, well, if he's getting that, I should get that because he came off a statistically better year than Crosby did on a
Yeah.
statistically better team. So, I mean, that could come from Hendrickson himself. That could also come from his agent. We don't know who really pulled the plug there, but I did also see that they were close, which seeing that, like as a fan, that's probably really what tugs at the heart the most is the fact that they were
Mhm.
so close. And then at the last second, this like Max Crosby deal kind of just blew everything up.
The interesting thing about where we are right now, especially, is we just saw this with the Rams and Matthew Stafford, where they technically let him go explore his market before they ended up adding him into an extension. So there's also this interesting piece to this puzzle too, that maybe Hendrickson goes out and sees that, hey, he's not going to get more money somewhere else, and that he should just take the Bengals deal. And Andrew Whitworth, former Bengals offensive lineman and former Rams offensive lineman, put out a great tweet kind of explaining that. And it's this interesting, like, new part of the NFL where these teams let these guys go see who what they are while they are still under contract, and then they can kind of make a decision based off that. I Yeah, it's just bizarre how seeing the fallout from the fan base here. People are kind of all over the place on this. It's just super frustrating because it all comes down to just the inability. Like, you're an Eagles fan. The Eagles, I read a great tweet yesterday that the Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow both signed their extensions in 2023. Since then, the Eagles have signed 8 guys to tens of millions dollars worth of contracts, and they've won a Super Bowl. They've been to 2 Super Bowls in that time period. Since then, the Bengals have signed one, and it's Logan Wilson, and he missed 90% of the, well, he missed more than half of last season with an injury. So at that point, you think, where are the Eagles coming up with this money? And I hate being blunt about it, but to me, it's kind of an effort thing.
Mhm. The other interesting thing that I saw originally is I was kind of looking into, like, how would the Bengals replace him? Like, what was their
Hmm.
philosophy there? Because 'Cause we've already talked about the fact that he's on the older side for, like, the prime of a defensive end. So, are they but what was interesting to me is the Bengals don't really have a high enough draft pick to get, like, an
No.
Abdul Carter or someone like that to really, like, make almost like that instant impact. So, my question is, are they gonna try to get draft capital out of him? Are they gonna try to totally reset that side of football? Because definitely last year, they got really called out for some of their struggles, particularly in the secondary, but I would say that this kind of the allowing him to seek a trade and then them losing Hubbard as well, kind of looks like to me that they're trying to maybe reset and get some young guys on that side of the ball because we saw a couple of teams try that and it worked out pretty well for them last year.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up. In Tim and I talked about this on the pod a couple days ago, is that there is a really good defensive end
Mhm,
class coming up in this iteration of the NFL draft. And he I don't want to say he's replaceable because he's not, because you don't
mhm.
replace an all pro, but you can find a way to maybe get a draft pick here and there. I'm seeing the Bengals are looking for a late second round, early third, which is kind of what we thought his value was going to be, kind of what I've talked about with some buddies. It's it's just interesting. I There's a lot of suitors out there for Trey Hendrickson too, and there's a lot of
Mhm,
teams that have availability. The Bears pop up as someone.
mhm,
Indianapolis pops up as someone as in Atlanta too. It's these teams that need these big defensive ends who are also looking to get their some guys off of their books as well that the Bengals could
mhm.
be interested in. It's just it's just something you don't see that often, and it's just curious to see how the Bengals are going to handle this.
Yeah, the other interesting option that I saw for him too was the LA Chargers, which was really
Hmm.
intriguing because they just let go of Joey Bosa.
Yeah.
So that kind of like flagged alarm bells in my head because I was like, if they both knew they were letting go, I feel like that would have been like a good type of like maybe negotiate for a swap because we've seen that
Mhm.
a bunch on the defensive side of the ball, usually with cornerbacks and DBs, where they just swap them. But obviously, those are two bigger names, which I'm assuming agents come way more into play at that point. But I just think it's interesting because, like, it's teams that, like you said, just need to get some people off their books as well. I'm very intrigued to see if the Bengals go out and either see if there's a veteran on the loose that needs a place that they just bring in,
Mhm.
or if they just try to go draft heavy because I think both sides have their pros and cons, but I mean, obviously, they should try their best to see if Hendrickson does want to come back because I do think it would be a big blow for them that they probably don't need going into next year.
Exactly, and the Bengals are kind of a mess to begin with how they negotiate. They never trade anyone. They don't have willingness to move up in the draft. They never move guys in season. And so this is all kind of uncharted territory, and the extensions period was uncharted. So my next thing for you, which I was going to ask is we talked a little bit about how maybe it's just Hendrickson trying to see it is trying to see how much his value is, but how much of this do you think is a negotiation tactic from his agent? Because we just saw him last season request a trade based on a contract dispute.
I wouldn't be surprised if the agent is more involved than Hendrickson
Hmm.
is, actually. We've seen this multiple times, and it's not even just limited to the NFL. I mean, you see it in Major League Baseball and in the NBA where agents totally take the wheel because they think they can get more money or they can get whether it's from the Bengals or from someone else. I mean, we've talked about it over and over again, but like that Max Crosby deal, like he saw
Yeah.
that and he's like, well, my player can do the same thing. If the Bengals aren't going to pay him that money, there are some pretty poorly run organizations, I'll say that way, who would be willing to pay that money to somebody
Yeah.
who can statistically and kind of recently put those stats on the board, which a lot of these teams do need because they either have lack of defensive end, or if you take a team like the Commanders, who they just came off a great season, but a lot of those guys are aging, and I think they just got rid of
Hmm.
Jonathan Allen as well. So
Yeah.
you have teams on both sides of the spectrum that could use him in terms of like utilization or just in like a mentor esque role, which you see teams doing that as well.
Yeah. And the interesting thing that's the other note is that the Bengals have never let their guys do something like this, like look for a
Yeah.
deal because like I said, the Bengals don't trade. So it's interesting to think that like it's just weird. I don't know. The Bengals are just such a weird spot. If you get rid of Hendrickson in some way, you save a little bit of money. It's and the Bengals, to be fair, and I've been very critical of the Bengals ownership and how much money they want to put forward throughout my time here on the Riverfront so far, and it's warranted, but they've played this game before. In 2018, Geno Atkins, who was an
Mhm.
all-pro, pro bowler, signed a pretty big deal with Cincinnati and in his 30s. And Carlos Dunlap did, who's a little bit younger, but they both signed on the same day in 2018. And Bengals fans are pretty stoked because they got to keep both of these big star defensive presence on their side of the ball. They were kind of their staples. And really, you got 14 and a half more sacks out of Geno Atkins, and then his body shut down. And then he just didn't play anymore. And so I think I understand the Bengals' hesitancy to do something like this because
Mhm.
obviously, Trey Hendrickson is going to think he can play still, but we really don't know. And the history honestly doesn't favor him, too. So it's it's this is an interesting scenario because both sides, I think, have valid points to some extent.
Yeah, the only thing that I think the Bengals would really miss out on with, like, if they just totally say, "We are gonna take whatever trade value they can get," is I feel like Hendrickson has been, like, very consistent. He had, like,
Mhm.
one down year, like, a couple years ago, like, I wanna say 2022, 2021, where it just, like, wasn't really, but he's recorded double-digit sacks, like, 4 or
Yeah,
5 times in the last 5 years, which you don't see a lot from that position unless you're like Aaron Donald, which he's totally on another level from anyone
totally.
else on that side of the ball, but he's a very consistent person to have at defensive end, and even with the Bengals struggling all year, he was probably realistically one of the only people keeping them in games on that side of the ball because he was able to get to the quarterback. Like, it's just things like that where as an organization who you have the offensive star power to win games, beat big teams, make the Super Bowl, and you're just gonna give up, like, a very key element of your defense, like, if I'm someone on the offensive side of the ball, I would be getting a little bit worried, especially when you
Mhm.
look at T. Higgins, who he's tagged, but he's not signed. Like he could still probably find a way out of it if he really wanted to. I
Mhm.
It sounds a little bit of alarm bells for me because if they're just totally resetting while their offense is in its prime years, it's just something that I wouldn't exactly be looking forward to as a fan.
Yeah. All right, so I think that's about it for our show today. The Bengals contract carousel continues. We've seen all these
Oh,
dominoes begin to fall so far, and but free agency starting on Wednesday, we are right in the prime of the NFL season here. So I wouldn't be surprised if we
oh
see
yeah.
stuff done in the next couple days. So Caroline,
Yeah.
thanks for joining us for this your first go around here on Welcome to the Jungle.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome, folks. All right, as always, we will probably be back with more breaking news information around the
Oh yeah.
Cincinnati Bengals universe from Owen Timmerding and Caroline Palmer. Thank you for tuning in, and Who Dey.
Yep.